Members, we'll call our session to order here today. And before we go to the daily routine, I just want to read the draw for the late debate under Rule 5.5. It reads as follows: therefore it be resolved that the NDP government honour its commitment of being more open and accountable by apologizing to the retirees about the lack of consultation around future pension benefits. And that was submitted by the Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park and will be held at the hour of interruption at 6 o'clock. The daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Speaker, I have a beg leave to table a petition to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. It says, whereas the road to the community of Robbins in Cape Ogat was last paved in the early 1980s, whereas the road is used by residents and employees of the Clearwater Live Lobster Holding Facility, including the heavy trucks that transport lobsters to the facility, whereas this road is also accessed by tourists for the scenic beauty and the lighthouse at the end of the road. Whereas the road is in deplorable condition with sections of pavement missing, seaside banks eroding, and general deterioration, which is making the road a danger to all users, such that there is great fear an accident will happen and a possible loss of life. We, the residents of Robbins and Cape Ogat, along with the employees of the Clearwater Live Lobster Holding Facility, call upon the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal to take immediate action to add the Robbins Cape Ogat Road to the capital priority list for immediate upgrades and repaving. Mr. Speaker, it is signed by 117 residents, and I have proudly affixed my signature.
The petition is tabled. Any further petitions?
Still listening, Frank?
Presenting reports of committees.
Get the tender ready.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of Law Amendments, I am directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bills: an act to establish the Nova Scotia Voluntary Carbon Emissions Offset Fund, an act to amend Chapter 17 of the Act of 1995-96, the Revenue Act. The committee recommends that these bills to be favourable consideration of the House without amendments.
Thank you. Order these bills be referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Bills. The Honourable Minister of Justice. And
Mr. Speaker, once again, as Chair of the Committee of Law Amendments, I am directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bill number 35, an act respecting provincial financial administration, and Bill number 47, an act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act. The committee recommends that these bills to the favourable consideration of the House with certain amendments.
Order that these bills be referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Bills. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in the House today to honour a man who gave the ultimate sacrifice. A man who devoted his life to his country, the Canadian Armed Forces, and most importantly, helping others. I'm referring, Mr. Speaker, obviously, to Petty Officer Second Class Craig Blake, a 37-year-old father of two who was killed Monday by a roadside bomb in Afghanistan. An Ontario native, Mr. Blake was a member of the Fleet Diving Unit Atlantic at CFB Shearwater. Mr. Speaker, I am saddened to say that Mr. Blake has been stationed in Afghanistan for only a few weeks when he was killed. He was returning to the base yesterday afternoon after successfully disposing of an improvised explosive device when another bomb was detonated in the Panjwai district about 25 kilometers southwest of Kandahar City. I understand that Mr. Blake has been living in Nova Scotia for some time before his deployment overseas. During his time here, he coached minor hockey in Dartmouth, enjoyed sailing, and competing in triathlons. Speaker, this man touched many lives, and he will be sorely missed by all those who knew him. On behalf of all Nova Scotians, I want to express my deepest sympathies to his family, friends, colleagues, and indeed all of our Canadian forces. On this 100th anniversary of the Canadian Navy, Nova Scotia and all Canadians will honour Mr. Blake's courage and sacrifice in the line of duty. It is sad irony on this momentous occasion, we must also recognize the first death of a Canadian sailor in action since October 04, when Lieutenant Chris Saunders was killed in a fire on board submarine destined for Halifax. Mr. Blake's death brings to 143 the number of Canadian Forces members to have died in the Afghan mission since it began in 2002. Mr. Speaker, these deaths are a somber reminder of the deadly situation which the men and women of our Canadian Armed Forces are faced with overseas on a daily basis. It takes a special kind of person to serve your country, someone who is strong, brave, and kind, someone who is willing to leave behind everything that she or he knows and loves to help complete strangers. I would like to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to thank our men and women of our armed forces, both in Canada and overseas, for their hard work, dedication, and sacrifice. You are all heroes in our eyes. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the responses of the other two parties, I would ask for a moment of silence. Thank you.
Certainly. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Deputy Premier for a copy of his remarks today. Today, Mr. Speaker, is a sad day for the family of the loved ones of Petty Officer Second Class Craig Blake, and indeed all Canadians. Petty Officer Blake was killed just 3 weeks into his first mission in Afghanistan by an improvised explosive device on Monday, the first sailor to die in action since October 2004. Petty Officer Blake was known for his adept skill as a clearance diver with the Navy, but was also noted for his unwavering dedication and fearless commitment to making the lives of his fellow company men and women safer through his efforts of disposing of IEDs. Petty Officer Blake was a sailor, but he was also a son, a father, and a husband. To his wife and 2 small children, their loss is immense. Their sacrifice is hard for us to imagine. Today, they are in our thoughts, in our prayers, in our hearts. We will remember Petty Officer Craig Blake as a supporter of the community and a role model for young children as a local hockey coach and triathlete. He was known for his good cheer, kind heart, and devotion to his family. Communities across our province will remember Petty Officer Blake's positive impact on the lives of many Nova Scotians through the Fleet Diving Unit's efforts to raise funds for the Christmas Daddies. Mr. Speaker, as we stand in our place today to recognize the outstanding contribution of Petty Officer Blake, both here and abroad, it is not lost on anyone that today we mark the 100th anniversary of the Canadian Navy, and we must do so acknowledging the loss of one of their own. To the current members serving our country, both here and abroad, we acknowledge your efforts and share in your sadness today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, the Progressive Conservative Caucus joins with all members of this House of Assembly and Canadians everywhere in remembering Petty Officer Second Class Craig Blake, who died this week while serving our country in Afghanistan. In extending our deepest condolences to his family and friends, we reflect on his contribution to the forces as a Navy diver who was stationed here at CFB Shearwater and most recently as an EDO near Kandahar City. His loss carries particular significance on this, the 100th anniversary of the Canadian Navy, as we look to the tremendous courage and service of all of the men and women who have dedicated their lives in defending our nation by sea and the rights of those who are being denied the most basic human and democratic freedoms. Craig Blake, a 37-year-old husband and father from Simcoe, Ontario, represents the dedication demonstrated by members of our military service. While we mourn his passing as a nation, as a province, we of course recognize that the greatest loss is being felt by those who knew him best: his wife, his 2 young children, his family, his friends, and his fellow soldiers who are remembering him today for his generous spirit, his love of card games, and his sense of purpose. A member of the military family said of Craig Blake that he was a true role model, and perhaps that is one of the most sincere testaments of the integrity of any life, that many felt fortunate simply to have known him. We too are fortunate. We are fortunate to have had Petty Officer Blake and so many outstanding young men and women representing our country as defenders of peace. So as we mourn the loss, we also give thanks for his life and for all those who have made every effort to fulfill the mission of our Canadian forces.
Thank you. Any further statements by ministers? The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, before I read the ministerial statement, I beg leave to introduce Department of Justice Legal Services Director Ed Gore and his Administrative Manager Susan Kitson. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to rise in this House on this occasion to thank the Department of Justice Director of Legal Services, Ed Gore, and his Administrative Assistant, Susan Kitson, for their roles in the federal and provincial government's landmark settlement with tobacco companies. On April 13, 2010, the Government of Canada, with participation from all provinces and territories, negotiated comprehensive agreements with 2 tobacco companies, the J.T. McDonald Corporation and the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company, who accepted responsibility for their role in the cross-border smuggling of contraband tobacco products in the early 1990s. The federal government worked with other provinces and territories to negotiate a financial settlement whereby the tobacco companies involved paid a total of $550 million, which has been distributed to the provinces and Canada. From the settlement, Nova Scotia received $12.4 million, a welcome amount during these tough financial times. Mr. Speaker, it was in 2004-2005 that Nova Scotia filed a Crown claim against JTI McDonald Corporation. Over these past years, Ed Gore successfully represented the province of Nova Scotia on behalf of the Department of Justice, Health Promotion and Protection, and Finance. This complicated case often required Mr. Gore to travel to Vancouver, Toronto, and Ottawa for meetings with federal, provincial, and territory counterparts. This legal case was by no means easy and took years to complete. The $12.4 million Nova Scotia receives is a good resolution of a very complex case. The guilty plea is a clear signal that governments are making tobacco companies pay the price for aiding in the illicit traffic of tobacco production. Mr. Speaker, the government has taken action to protect the integrity of the tax system, and the settlement and fines hold these companies accountable under the law for operating outside the system. The agreement reconfirmed that all governments are united in their determination to address the problem and challenges posed by the contraband tobacco market. Mr. Speaker, we do not want to see companies in Canada profit from illegal activities. This settlement brings closure to the issue that have been outstanding for more than a decade. And again, I want to thank and congratulate Mr. Gore and Ms. Kitsett for their hard work on this complex and complicated issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise as the Justice Critic for the official opposition. I want to start by thanking the Minister of Justice for providing us with a copy of his statement prior to reading it today. And I too want to commend both Ed Gores and his assistant Susan Kidson for the work they did. I know I did have the opportunity to meet Mr. Gores previously in court, and I can't remember what the matter was, but I know that I was representing a constituent and he was representing the province, as he has done over so many years. So we certainly commend him for the work that was done in ensuring that Nova Scotians were able to claim a portion of the settlement that was achieved in this remark. Mr. Speaker, one has to remember that Nova Scotia did claim, when they did join this lawsuit, a loss of $326 million in lost revenue in the form of taxation due to illegal cigarettes and illegal tobacco here in our province. So today we have a $12.2 million settlement out of a $326 million loss. Speaker, that works out to about 3.8 cents on the dollar of what the government claimed was lost here, which only Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick received less on the dollar of what they claimed. Mr. Speaker, my colleague, the Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park, has raised this issue in the legislature just last week, and she requested government plans as to what is going to be done with the $12.2 million settlement. And I would note that in the minister's statement that he gave absolutely no indication of what will be done with this money. Our question is, will it simply be added to general revenue, or will the revenue be used to increase enforcement? Because this government must have known that when they increased the HST by 2%, history has shown us that increase in taxes usually leads to more smuggling and illegal tobacco making its way into Nova Scotia, and we have yet to hear of what plan that the government has put in place to be able to address that, since they have chosen to increase the HST by 2%. At the same time, we question whether part of that $12.2 million will be used for smoking cessation programs. Mr. Speaker, the rate of smoking in Nova Scotia remains too high, and especially amongst young people, the rates are way too high, and anything that we can do not only as government but as well as legislators to try to reduce those rates is something that we should all be working for. Speaker, the other issue with this is that there are actually two lawsuits that were taking place. This one has now been settled, but the other lawsuit that we are still awaiting for information from this government as how they plan on proceeding is with the health care cost recovery legislation, which was passed by this House some years ago. And in the fall, I did raise the issue with the Minister of Justice and with the Premier, and it was quite clear from their answers that the government has yet to decide whether they are going to become part of this massive lawsuits against tobacco companies for the cost to a healthcare system that has resulted from tobacco use in our province. So I would certainly hope that the Minister of Justice would soon inform this House as to how we are going to proceed, and to ensure that Nova Scotia, whether it's through Mr. Gores or through other legal representatives, are there to make sure that our interests are being represented when this class action lawsuit goes forward, to ensure that tobacco companies are held responsible for the costs and the devastation that has occurred to so many Nova Scotians, not only to our healthcare system, but to so many families who have lost loved ones due to tobacco-related issues. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I do commend those who work so hard to make this settlement a reality, but certainly much more work needs to be done in deciding where the $12.2 million will be spent, and as well what role our government is going to play as we move forward on the health care cost recovery litigation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to rise to respond to this statement on behalf of our Justice critic, the Honourable Member for Cumberland South. And it's also very fitting, and I'm very pleased as a former Attorney General Minister of Justice, having worked with Mr. Gores, to be able to rise in the House and join with the Minister and my other colleague from Richmond to be able to recognize Mr. Gores and Ms. Kidson for their good efforts. And indeed, the one thing I will say that Mr. Gores has had a great capacity in doing is to take a file and deal with it. And oft times, as the Minister would know, Mr. Gores would come in to do a briefing. And the one thing I learned, there was nothing brief about the briefings. And, but I'll tell you, what it was comprehensive, a knowledge that was part of a pan-Canadian effort that Mr. Gores and his colleagues all did such a great job in securing for this province. And it speaks as well, Mr. Speaker, I think, to the quality and the integrity and the professionalism that we have in our civil service that sometimes goes unrecognized, that indeed we have that capacity within our civil service ranks. We have professionals that can do world-class work on our behalf from within the civil service. And I know firsthand that the Department of Justice has many women and men working as outstanding professionals, indeed complement the work of this government to see the type of outcomes we have. And so I wanted to Mr. Gores, Ms. Kidson, and all of their colleagues say a special thank you for their efforts. And I would note also that for a government that is struck on wanting to have consultants, that a lot of capacity lies within the civil service to aid and support the government in its efforts. And I know the Attorney General is well served and will continue to have professionals within his department to continue the effort. And as was indicated, there's more work to do. But today, I want to send our kudos and compliments to Mr. Gores, Ms. Kidson, and all of their colleagues that have been part of bringing this effort to a conclusion, and thank them for their good work on behalf of all taxpayers of this province.
Thank you. Any further statements by ministers? If not, I'm going to recognize the Honourable Member for Cumberland North on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to do an introduction today. With us in the East Gallery are some constituents of mine from Cumberland North. We have Howard and Pauline Glenn, founder of the Grandparents' Rights for Nova Scotia Association, and also association members Faye Rood and Barb and Saul Fleck. Mr. Speaker, I ask that all members give these guests a warm welcome to the House. Thank you.
We welcome all our guests here this afternoon and hope they enjoy the proceedings of the House. The Honourable Member for Colchester Musquodoboit Valley on an introduction.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'd like to direct the attention of the House to the East Gallery, where we're being visited this afternoon by Percy McPhee. Percy from Stewiacke has for some years been a leading advocate for the interests of insurance claimants affected by the soft tissue cap, and he's here with us this afternoon. He is in Stewiacke, my neighbour and friend. Percy, would you please stand and receive the welcome of the House?
Thank you. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 100 years ago today, the Canadian Navy was born, and whereas the Canadian Navy has distinguished itself over the past century as a skilled, dedicated, and courageous group of men and women, and whereas the Canadian Navy has called Halifax its home since its formation, and CFB Halifax has become the largest military base in Canada. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate the Canadian Navy on its centennial and thank its sailors for its dedication and sacrifice over the past 100 years and in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Deputy Premier once again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on May 1st, former Member 2 First Nations Chief Lawrence Paul passed away in Sydney, Cape Breton. And whereas Lawrence Paul was devoted to Member 2 First Nation and to the Mi'kmaq community as a whole and founded the Native Alcohol and Drug Abuse Counseling Association, serving as its executive director. And whereas the citizens of Member 2 First Nations mourn the loss of an important role model and leader, they can take comfort in knowing that their fellow Nova Scotians are grieving with them and supporting them during this difficult time. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly extend the deepest condolences to the people of Member 2 First Nation and join me in 1 minute of silence to pay tribute to this outstanding citizen. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate. There
has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Labour and Workforce Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas all Nova Scotians deserve the peace of mind that the buildings they work, play and live in are constructed safely, and whereas the Department of Labour and Workforce Development, in partnership with the Alliance of Canadian Building Officials Association and the Nova Scotia Buildings Officials Association, organize an annual Building Safety Week to highlight the important role municipal officials have in making buildings in our community safe. And whereas this year's theme in Nova Scotia, Safer Buildings, Safer Communities, illustrates the role these professionals play in the overall health and safety of our province. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House agree to support May 2nd to 8th as Building Safety Week in Nova Scotia and thank municipal officials who help keep Nova Scotians safe through their hard work. Mr. Speaker, request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas hospice palliative workers, both paid and voluntary, in Nova Scotia provide unconditional, compassionate care and bring comfort and dignity to individuals approaching the end of their lives. And whereas Nova Scotia has supported its mandate to ensure quality end-of-life care by appointing the province's first hospice palliative care coordinator at the Department of Health, by establishing a network of hospice palliative care managers, by building capacity with volunteers and other partners, and by working to create a strategy for end-of-life care in Nova Scotia. And whereas during the week of May 2nd to 8th, governments and healthcare workers and volunteers are raising awareness about hospice palliative care, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House recognize this week as Hospice Palliative Care Week in Nova Scotia and acknowledge the dedication of healthcare professionals, staff, and volunteers. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of African and Nova Scotian Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I should move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas hip-hop artist Dwayne Gibson, a.k.a. Dio, or Defy the Odds, is a Guinness Book of World Records celebrated rapper, and whereas for the past 7 years, this Cape Breton native has used his talents to deliver a motivational message to nearly 500 elementary and junior high schools across Canada, and whereas the acclaimed artist brought his anti-bullying, anti-violence message to 3 schools in Nova Scotia this past week, where he encouraged students to stay driven, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House commend Dwayne Gibson, a.k.a. Defy the Odds, for using his talent as a hip-hop artist to encourage Nova Scotia students to persevere against obstacles and believe in their dreams. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. Any further government notices of motion? Introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Mr. Speaker, first with regards to this bill that I will be tabling today to ban the non-essential pesticides use in our province, I'd like to introduce some special guests in our gallery, if I may.
Certainly.
Mr. Speaker, in the Eastern Gallery, His Worship Mayor Robert Stidd, the Mayor of Wolfville, Meg McCullum and Mike De Rosenall with the Canadian Cancer Society. Their CEO, Maureen Summers, sends her regrets. Also from the Ecology Action Centre in Pesticide-Free Nova Scotia, Mr. Chris Benjamin and Elizabeth Pierce. From the Sierra Club of Canada, Gretchen Fitzgerald. And also with them today is David Thompson and Peter Bugden. I ask the House to give them a warm welcome and thank you for coming out. Mr. Speaker, I beg the leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Prohibit the Sale and Use of Non-Essential Pesticides.
The Honourable Minister of the Environment begs leave to introduce a bill, an act to prohibit the sale and use of non-essential pesticides.
Bill 61, entitled An Act to Prohibit the Sale and Use of Non-Essential Pesticides.
Order this bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table an act to repeal Chapter 314 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Nova Scotia Hospital Foundations Act.
The Honourable Minister of Health begs leave to introduce a bill, an act to repeal Chapter 314 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Nova Scotia Hospital Foundation Act.
Bill 62, entitled An Act to Repeal Chapter 314, the Revised Statutes 1989, the Nova Scotia Hospital Foundation Act.
Order this bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled the Legal Profession Act, Act of 2004.
The Honourable Minister of Justice begs leave to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 28 of the Acts of 2004, the Legal Profession Act.
Bill 63, entitled an act to amend Chapter 28 of the Acts of 2004, the Legal Profession Act.
Order this bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today marks the 100th anniversary of the Navy in Canada, and whereas the theme of the Canadian Naval Centennial is to bring the Navy to Canadians with events that are focused on honouring the past, showcasing the current Navy, and to look forward to the future of the Navy. And whereas in the past 100 years, the men and women of the Canadian Navy have played an important and central role in the life of Nova Scotia, and will continue to be a significant part of our province into the future. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly recognize the role that the men and women of the Canadian Navy have played in the life of Nova Scotia for the past 100 years and look forward to continuing this vital relationship into the future. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on May 4th, 1910, the Naval Service Bill, which established a Canadian Navy, received royal assent. And whereas in the 100 years since its formation, the Canadian Navy has laid the foundation of a truly sovereign nation and has played an integral role in international peace and stability. And whereas for 100 years, our bravest and brightest men and women have volunteered and in many cases have given their lives in order to defend their nation and keep its citizens safe. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly mark the 100th anniversary of the Canadian Navy by celebrating its many achievements, by honouring all those who served or have served in this Marine Command, and by pledging to continue to support our armed forces to ensure they remain strong and proud. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteers often begin at a young age, and whereas 4-H has been the incubator for many young volunteers, and whereas on April 23, 2010, the municipality of East Hants recognized Wanda Hamilton with a Shining Star Award for her volunteerism, which began and continues with 4-H, and now also includes Sunday School, Cobequid District, Home and School, and other community projects involving young people. Therefore, be resolved, this House of Assembly congratulates Wanda Hamilton on her Shining Star Award and thank her for her notable example of community service. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to do an introduction prior to reading this resolution.
Certainly.
I'd like to draw the attention of the host to the West Gallery, where Bob Manuel is seating. Bob is no stranger to many of this House. He's served in various capacities with former governments and now is the Chief of Staff for the Conservative Caucus. I'd ask Bob to stand and show off his new haircut and allow all members of the House to give him a warm welcome before I read this resolution. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas earlier this year, Bob Manuel, a 10-year heart transplant survivor, launched the Have a Heart campaign in support of the multi-organ transplant program at the Queen Elizabeth II. And whereas wanting to give something back, Bob vowed to cut his shoulder length hair if he raised $5,000 or get a buzz if the total reached $10,000. And whereas on March 1st, during an episode of Breakfast Television, Bob went through with the buzz, raising over $10,000 and donating his hair for a cancer wig. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Bob for surpassing his fundraising goal, thank him for his dedication to others, and admire him for his determination. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. Well done. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas former Member 2 First Nation Chief Dr. Lawrence Frederick Paul was a hero, a leader, and a pioneer, and whereas whether it was serving his country as a paratrooper in the Second World War and the Korean War, forcing the federal government to take action regarding the substandard living conditions in Member 2, or founding the Native Alcohol and Drug Abuse Counseling Association, Dr. Paul always worked in the best interests of the Mi'kmaq people across our region. And whereas on Saturday, May 1st, 2010, former Chief Dr. Lawrence Paul passed away at the age of 84, leaving a legacy of hope and opportunity for the future of his people. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly recognize the tremendous work accomplished by former Chief Dr. Lawrence Paul and offer our deepest condolences to his family, the residents of the Member 2 First Nation, as they mourn the passing of this great leader. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Adrian Lee was born on February the 12th, 2010 at the IWK Health Centre and proudly calls Brooklyn, West Hants County, Nova Scotia her home, where she resides with her parents Stephen and General Aboutlier and her bulldog Norton. And whereas Adrian has been successful in doubling her weight, traveling extensively to Woods Harbor in Dartmouth to visit her grandparents, and has become active in her community as a member of Baby Love Group of Windsor, and with help from her aunt, Suzanne, has developed a keen sense of fashion. And whereas Adrian is her family's sparkling sunshine and makes their world a happier place. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognize Adrian Lee's Laboutlier's 100th day of life on May 23rd, 2010. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. Congratulations. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice in the future days to move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on this date in 1910, the Naval Service Bill received royal assent, whereas the Naval Service Bill created a Federal Department of the Naval Service, authorized the Naval Reserve Force and a Naval Volunteer Force, and established a Naval College in Halifax in order to train prospective officers in all branches of naval science, strategy, and tactics. And whereas for the past 100 years, the men and women of Canada's Navy have served their country with pride and have had an especially important impact on Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize the significance of this date, which marks 100 years of the Navy in Canada, and congratulate and thank all members of the Navy, past and present, for their service to their country. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for a waiver.
There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed?
Agreed.
All those in favour signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Argyll.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day to move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas mental illness affects people of all ages, education level, income, and culture. And from May 3rd to 9th, mental health issues are recognized with National Mental Health Week. And whereas the Nova Scotia Mental Health Foundation and the Canadian Mental Health Association's Nova Scotia Division will host their 6th annual Inspiring Lives Awards luncheon this Thursday and recognize 12 Nova Scotians who have inspired others as they face their own challenges with mental illness or addiction. And whereas by sharing their experiences, these individuals are helping to raise awareness about mental illness and fight against the stigma surrounding it. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the fantastic work being undertaken by the Nova Scotia Division of the Canadian Mental Health Association and the Nova Scotia Mental Health Foundation as they continue to strive to make lives better for Nova Scotians suffering from this debilitating disease. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Truro Bible Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mr. Terry Hunt has been a dedicated volunteer in the Truro community for the past 20 years, and whereas Mr. Hunt has assisted in such projects as the renovation of the Colchester Legion Stadium, Victoria Park Pool, and the new Civic Centre project, and has been key to the development of the lacrosse program in Truro, and whereas Terry Hunt has been named the Truro Volunteer of the Year for 2010 for his outstanding commitment to volunteer work and being an inspiration by giving to the community in so many selfless ways, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates Terry Hunt on receiving the Truro Volunteer of the Year Award for 2010 and acknowledges his hard work and strong sense of community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I'll start with an introduction.
Certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I direct the members of the House their attention to the West Gallery, where we have a number of special guests. I think I have all the names right here. Gerald McCarthy, who was the very first principal of Prince Andrew High School from 1960 to 65, and following his tenure became superintendent of the Dartmouth School Board and retired as the Deputy Minister of Education. Natalie Zink, retired educator and co-chair of the Prince Andrew 50th Reunion Committee. Judy Morrison, a partner in the Brokerage House Financial and co-chair of the Reunion Committee. Gil Irwin, retired Dartmouth police officer, a former PA grad and responsible for the Reunion's sports memorabilia exhibit. And I think Clyde Horner's there as well, who has organized the folks who are here today. So I'd like the House to welcome them to your House today, Mr. Speaker. I might add, Mr. Speaker, I'm also a grad of the best high school in Nova Scotia, so Prince Andrew High School. So, Mr. Touche. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Prince Andrew High School first opened its doors on Woodlawn Road in Dartmouth in September of 1960. And whereas in honor of the 50th anniversary, Prince Andrew High School will host a Golden Jubilee reunion from July 22nd to 24th this year. And whereas students from Prince Andrew High School who graduated between 1960 and 1965 under the stewardship of Principal Gerald J. McCarthy during the McCarthy era will participate in this week-long event. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly congratulate Prince Andrew High School on its 50th anniversary and send best wishes to all graduates of the McCarthy era and the organizers of the Golden Jubilee reunion, and welcome home to Dartmouth all those graduates returning for this momentous occasion. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Wendy Martin has been a reporter with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation for more than 20 years and currently serves as the senior news producer of CBC Cape Breton. And whereas the Canadian Radio and Television News Directors Association recently presented Wendy with the Creative Use of Sound Award for her story on the flight of the Silver Dart, which aired on CBC Radio in July 2009. And whereas Wendy, along with Christina Harnett, has also been nominated for 2009 Atlantic Journalism Award for Enterprise Reporting for their story, Trouble in Cape Breton. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Wendy Martin and all the staff of CBC Cape Breton for their continued excellence in bringing the stories of Cape Breton to life. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today marks the 100th anniversary of the Royal Canadian Navy, with celebrations and parades taking place both at home here on the East Coast and in Victoria, BC on the West Coast. And whereas my daughter, Lieutenant Kelsey Dauphiney, a Mars officer on the HMCS Algonquin, stationed in Esquimalt, BC, will be participating today with many of her colleagues in the Naval Centennial Celebration. And whereas these celebrations will pay tribute to our Royal Canadian Navy, her 100-year history, as well as acknowledging the many years of dedicated service of sailors past and present. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognizes and celebrates the centennial of the Royal Canadian Navy and congratulates my daughter, Lieutenant Kelsey Dauphiney, a Mars officer on the HMCS Algonquin, presently stationed in Esquimalt, BC, as she participates with her colleagues in these celebrations. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas GEM Healthcare Group has been working on the development of a new long-term health facility with the Department of Health and the Halifax Regional Municipality for a number of years, and whereas the project was approved by the Department and HRM Council in early spring of 2009, and whereas the sod turning ceremony for the long-awaited and community-supported project will happen today, May 4th, 2010, therefore be it resolved that members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate GEM Healthcare on the start of construction for their new healthcare facility at 6 Admiral Street in Dartmouth. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas May is Gaelic Awareness Month, and whereas maintaining tradition is not about living in our past, but about better understanding ourselves and appreciating from where we have come. And whereas education helps people to correct inaccurate views they may have about the many cultures for which our province is blessed. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly recognize the value of government support for ethnic cultures in our province, because knowing and understanding each other's cultures achieves a higher level of humanity for us all. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Oh, there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Alan Vino of West Northfield has been a member of the Lunenburg County Christmas Tree Producers Association since 1999, growing beautiful trees for export and all residents of Nova Scotia. And whereas in December 2009, Alan Vino donated a 17-foot balsam fir tree to from the Lunenburg County Christmas Tree Producers very important people tree program. And whereas this magnificent balsam fir was displayed proudly in the Red Room of Province House for the Christmas season of 2009 for all to enjoy. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly thank Mr. Alan Vino for his family donating the wonderful tree that graced the Red Room of Province House for the Christmas season in December 2009. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas nearly 100 members, leaders and friends of the 1st Bedford Scouts, Cubs and Beavers banded together on April 20th, 2010 to clean up Frenchman's Brook in Dartmouth, and whereas they collected 75 bags of garbage and recyclables, as well as numerous paint cans, propane tanks and other debris, and whereas this effort was part of 1st Bedford's efforts to mark Earth Day. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House of Assembly commend the 1st Bedford Scouts, Cubs and Beavers and wish them well in their continuing efforts to clean up our watercourses. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Canada's Outstanding Young Farmers Program is an annual competition to recognize farmers that exemplify excellence in their profession and to promote the contribution of agriculture. And whereas the Atlantic Region's title for Canada's Outstanding Young Farmers has gone to Patricia Bishop and Joss Holton of Port Williams. And whereas both Patricia and Joss are graduates of Nova Scotia Agricultural College, and last year the couple launched a very successful community-shared agricultural program, growing 26 varieties of vegetables for members locally and in Halifax. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Patricia Bishop and Josh Holton of Port Williams on winning this prestigious award. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the municipality of the District of Guysborough held its Volunteer Awards Night on April 19, 2010, and whereas each year the municipality recognizes individuals who have made a significant contribution to their community, and whereas in recognition of his contribution to the Manchester-Boylston Volunteer Fire Department, Danny McPherson is one of the 2010 Municipality of the District of Guysborough Volunteer Awards recipients. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Danny McPherson on his 2010 Municipality of the District of Guysborough Volunteer Award and wish him continued success in his future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Olive Doris King of Myra Road in Porters Lake was born on September the 20th, 1910, is one of 6 children raised on Hawthorne Street in Dartmouth by her parents James Albert and Margaret Florence Bowes. And whereas Mrs. King's family survived the Halifax explosion, even though at the time her brother was standing in front of a window and suffered only minor scratches, and her father was driving the Halifax-Dartmouth ferry. And whereas Mrs. King married Ernest King and worked as bookkeeper in various businesses of Metro, therefore be resolved that members of this House recognize Olive Doris King on her 100th birthday in September and wish her continued good health and happiness. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Sunday, May 2nd at Monroe Park, formerly known as Kelly's Beach, there was an unveiling of 6 panels depicting the North Side's military history and also the unveiling of the PBY-5A Canso Seaplane Monument during ceremonies to mark the 67th anniversary of the end of the Battle of the Atlantic. And whereas during World War I and II, Kelly's Beach was home to a seaplane base that provided protection for convoys that sailed in and out of Sydney Harbour en route to support the war effort in Europe. And whereas this monument, developed and managed by the Cape Breton Regional Municipality staff and the Cape Breton County Economic Development Authority, and the seaplane replica created by metal fabricator Todd Vasello of Pictou County, will preserve our military history and recognize the contributions of the North Sydney community to achieving peace in our world. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly join me in congratulating Councillor Gordon MacLeod, Bill Murphy, Marilyn McPhee, Megan Dethridge, Eileen Lannon-Olford, Don Smith, and Todd Vasello for their combined efforts in bringing this dream into reality. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debates.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas going that extra mile for your community is what the Victoria Credit Union in Windsor, Hants County is all about, and that extra effort has earned them the title of the Town of Windsor's Business Volunteer of the Year Provincial Representative. And whereas the staff at the Victory Credit Union has consistently assisted with funding for local nonprofit groups and organizations, as well as sponsoring many athletic associations and providing bursaries for local high school graduates. And whereas participating in events such as the Windsor Pumpkin Regatta, Walton Days Parade, Feed Nova Scotia Food Drives, and the Children's Wish Fund Telethon, just to name a few, is an excellent exercise in team building and a great boost for the staff. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly congratulate all the staff of the Victory Credit Union and thank them wholeheartedly for their generosity in giving back to the community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax, Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Park West School takes pride in being one of the most multicultural schools in Nova Scotia, and whereas on April 22, 2010, the school hosted a Canadian citizenship ceremony for 51 people from 26 countries, including 2 families from the Park West School community, and whereas this ceremony was preceded by a roundtable discussion which brought community members, students, and new Canadians together to talk about our shared values and active citizenship. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate the parents, volunteers, staff, and students who made this ceremony so memorable for the new Canadians and provided such an enriching experience for the school students and visitors alike. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jamie Chesson of Cheticamp was awarded the 2009 Lieutenant Governor's Medal for École NDA, and whereas Jamie's family was awarded the Nova Scotia Volunteer Family of the Year Award in 2009, and whereas Jamie participates in most school committees, has his own CKJM weekly radio show, and volunteers with Père Fissette, Le Conseiller des Arts de Cheticamp, and Le Grand Cercle. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly recognize Jamie for his academic standing and his contributions to his community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Candace Sutherland arrived in North Sydney on her Cross Canada run to support 4 charities, having begun her run in Newfoundland on March 20th, and whereas this Manitoba teenager will be the first female and the first Aboriginal female to run across Canada, and actually was running through Antigonish yesterday morning. And whereas Candace is running to gain support for the Salvation Army, the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Canada, the Canadian Diabetes Association, and the Canadian Cancer Society, Candace and her Vision for Hope run expect to be in British Columbia by Christmas. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly join me in wishing Candace a successful run and thank her for her commitment to raise money for great causes. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas veteran Lunenburg County firefighter Martin Bell recently received an honorary with Glowing Hearts Medal from the Canadian Light Force Command on behalf of Canadian firefighters. And whereas Mr. Bell is the president of the Canadian Volunteer Fire Services Association, and whereas the association was involved in the Canadian Human Watts Power Tour, which involved pedaling a bike across Canada, generating power which was downloaded into fuel cells and used by power stations to power defibrillators and other types of equipment. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Martin Bell on receiving this prestigious award. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. Any further notices of motion? I'm going to recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to draw the attention of the members to the West Gallery, where we have some visitors with us. We have Mr. Cleon Smith and Ms. Susan Walker. And Mr. Smith is the coordinator of the Halifax chapter for the Canadian Council of the Blind. And Ms. Walker is an active member of the same Halifax chapter. And she is also a constituent of mine and a neighbour in Clayton Park West. I'd like them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House. Thank you.
We welcome our guests here this afternoon. The time now is 1:15, and oral question period will go to 2:15. And I'll recognize the honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Environment. Mr. Speaker, since April the 20th, the oil spill catastrophe in the Gulf of Mexico has gotten worse. There's no question, Mr. Speaker, this is one of the worst environmental disasters the world has ever seen. So my question to the Minister, has this unprecedented disaster steered you away from lifting the moratorium on Georges Bank in 2012?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think the question needs to be directed to the Minister of Energy, but I don't have no problem addressing it. And I tell you, I watch with great interest. I'm aware of what's going on in the Gulf, and it's a very troubling issue, I can assure you that. I also can tell the member opposite that I pay attention to these situations around the world, and I can tell you that our government is in the process of making an informed decision, and I'm very confident with expertise around our table, our caucus, and our Ministry of Energy will make that informed decision in the appropriate time. Thank you.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, President Obama has extended the moratorium on Georges Bank until 2017. Yesterday, California's Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger withdrew his support for a plan to expand oil exploration off the coast of California. Mr. Speaker, the minister keeps talking about how great the technology is for oil drilling, but we've just seen what the most up-to-date technology has done to the Gulf of Mexico. So Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, since this disaster off the coast of Louisiana, are you still sure about the drilling technology you've promoted these past weeks?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think the member opposite needs to be clear on what the discussions. I have said very consistently in the last number of weeks that our government, our cabinet is gathering information. There has been advances in technology. We are recognizing that, and in order for to make an informed decision, we have to gather all that information. The decision will be made by June the 1st, and I'm very confident in our cabinet. I'm very confident in the Ministry of Energy, and that information needs to be gathered, and we'll make an informed decision at the appropriate time. Thank you.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico will affect the ecosystem, the fishing industry, the tourism industry, and the lives of millions of people in that region. Even the tuna stocks in our region may be affected by this disaster. The decision on lifting the moratorium is a joint federal and provincial verdict, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the minister, have you spoken to the federal government about this important issue, and are they for or against lifting the moratorium on Georges Bank?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to answer part of that question and defer it to the Minister of Energy for the closing response. But I can tell you before I turn it over to the Minister of Energy, I want to ensure the member opposite and all members of this House that my former job as a fisherman, I can surely tell you that expertise is being brought to our caucus and our cabinet, the understanding of that environment from zooplankton to the migration of whales, that information is being brought there, and I can assure you that the Ministry of Energy will make the informed decision, and I'll defer that question now to the Minister of Energy.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member opposite for this question. You know, we all have much to learn from what has happened in the Louisiana coast. We certainly don't have all the answers, and I do share that continuing concern. I hear it all the time in my office in energy, the technology, and the improvements. I want the member opposite to know that I'm in regular contact with federal officials on not just this issue, but other issues. This is an ongoing concern. It is something, of course, we're paying attention to as citizens concerned about our environment, and as the minister who is going to advise my cabinet colleagues within the next number of days and weeks about my final advice. I thank you for bringing the matter to my attention, and I can assure you it will be one of the factors that I will consider as I make this decision.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Education. In a letter to me dated February 19th, the minister stated that her department was working in conjunction with school board leaders on a provincial mentor framework involving mathematics, and that an evaluation framework would soon be put together. I will table that letter. My question to the minister is this: can she give us the status of the evaluation framework today?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to say that my government shares the Math Mentor program as a priority, and I do want to give credit to the former government. I believe the program started around the time that I was first elected, so I've been following its evolution very, very carefully. And certainly it's about 7 years old, and it is time to do an evaluation, and that's something that's going to be started in the near future. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, in your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that information from the minister, and I believe she is sincere. It is good news, but there are conflicting messages, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Finance repeatedly said in his Back to Balance tour that there would be no additional dollars to expand programs. And in that correspondence of February 19th that I tabled, the minister indicated a willingness to increase the funding to widen the scope to support the Math Mentor program. And these appear to be conflicting. So my question to the minister is, will there be increased funding to support the expansion and scope of the provincial mentoring program in math?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have the information to compare it to last year, but certainly I am aware that over $2 million has been invested to maintain the mentors and the relevant professional development activities required to promote that program. I understand that some boards have invested some of their other formula funding into math mentorships as well. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, in your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will be following that with interest. In the same correspondence of February 19th, the minister stated that the Nova Scotia math curriculum for each grade level was going to be reviewed. So my question to the minister is, has the review begun, and what is the timeline for completion?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My recollection is that that review has been done. I think it's getting towards its final stages, and I think they've been looking at some models in Western Canada that have found that it's been very effective to have fewer objectives for each grade level, and teachers are then able to teach it to a higher standard. So I think that's the area that they're looking at and the direction they're going in, but it hasn't been finalized. But certainly we've looked at what's working well in other parts of Canada, and we'll be trying to integrate that into our program as soon as possible. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. On Friday, Prince Edward Island announced 10 new drugs would be added to their formulary. Lucentis is one of those drugs among them. As all the members of the House know, Lucentis is a medication that not only prevents someone from going blind, but can also improve the eyesight of someone who has already experienced vision loss. And members of the House will be aware that this leaves Nova Scotia now as the last province in Canada not to fund Lucentis as part of their formulary. While in opposition, the NDP were strong proponents that Lucentis be included in the drugs that are available to our pharmacare program members. And now that they're in power and have the power to do something about it, they're refusing to. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask the Minister of Health through you, how can she continue to deny Nova Scotians access to Lucentis when every other province in Canada has seen the value of this investment?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, our province spent last year about $240 million for drug coverage. Mr. Speaker, there are always new drugs that are coming forward that offer benefit to patients. Mr. Speaker, Lucentis is clearly one of those drugs. We have to make difficult decisions about drugs in the Department of Health, Mr. Speaker, but our government has a plan to make drugs more affordable with a drug management policy unit, which we will be setting up. It will have at least 3 initiatives we've identified that can help us arrive at more affordable drugs. And Mr. Speaker, I look forward to a time, Mr. Speaker, when those initiatives will see drugs like Lucentis on our formulary.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the minister mentions difficult decisions that the department has to make, and I'd like to ask her if she's thought about the difficult decisions that people living with macular degeneration have to make. If they haven't got the money, they're facing blindness, and I think the minister knows that. Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering whether you're familiar with the term patent cliff. The patent cliff refers to the time when patents on certain drugs expire and the pharmacare programs automatically revert to generics. This, in every instance, results in real savings for government. My question to the minister, Mr. Speaker, is could she please confirm for the benefit of the House whether her government will save a total of $12.5 million this year alone as a result of the patent cliff?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And to the honourable member, I am aware of the terminology. Mr. Speaker, there are brand name drugs that this year will be reverting to generic drugs. However, Mr. Speaker, no drugs will be coming off the formulary. And Mr. Speaker, the generic drug costs in Canada, we pay among the highest generic drug costs in the country. And Mr. Speaker, this is, I think, one of the initiatives that we've identified as an area that we need to lead an initiative through our drug management policy unit when it's up and running so that we will see more affordable drugs and we'll be able to redirect any savings back into drug coverage for people in the province of Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The drug management unit that the minister is referring to is not expected to be in place until about a year is up, and we need changes today, Mr. Speaker. Prince Edward Island is undergoing a major reorganization of their entire health system, and they were able to announce 10 new drugs that go on the formulary. So I do challenge the minister to tell us what takes so long here in Nova Scotia. Given the fact that we have got $12.5 million that's coming available, if that figure is correct, the minister didn't tell me specifically, but that is the figure she gave to the Canadian Council of the Blind when we had a visitor here a couple of weeks ago. And given that, the net cost of Lucentis is only $2.5 million, so we would actually have plenty of money in that savings from this patent change coming up in the next year. So with that, Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, can you please tell Mr. Smith, who's visiting us here in the gallery today, why you are delaying a decision to invest in Lucentis when the minister clearly has the financial capacity to do so?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the actual cost of Lucentis for this year would be about $4.5 million, Mr. Speaker, and over a 3-year period, we're looking at an expenditure of $10 million. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work to make drugs more affordable for Nova Scotians through a variety of initiatives that the Drug Policy Management Unit will be designed to implement, Mr. Speaker. And I, again, will look forward to seeing Lucentis as well as a number of other drugs covered in our formulary when we have the means to be able to do that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Economic and Rural Development. Mr. Speaker, last Thursday I asked the Minister about the province's loan to Northern Timber. The Minister responded with, these transactions, they're very deep, they're very complex. My question to the Minister, now that you've had a few days to review this deep and complex transaction, can you tell the House more information as to who is paying for the legal fees and insurance for Northern Timber?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Northern Pulp, as far as I know, it certainly wasn't. It wasn't the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on your first
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Minister for tabling one page of the contract last Thursday, and I'll retable it back to him because it had nothing to offer. It's too bad we already have a copy, as well as the other 7 pages of the contract. $75 million of taxpayer money, Mr. Speaker, one of the largest loans on record in the province, loaned without an accurate description to this House as to who is paying the legal fees and the insurance for Northern Timber. So my question to the Minister is very basic. Who's paying the fees and insurance for this contract, the province or Northern Timber?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will reiterate that the Northern Pulp was a very, very complicated transaction. There were a lot of intimate details with that transaction. It was something that didn't materialize in a matter of weeks. This was a contract that took an enormous amount of time. And when a member in this House asks for any intimate details on any contract that we've done here with the province of Nova Scotia, I think it's only fair. I certainly wouldn't want to give out wrong or false information. I would certainly like to do some research, and I'll get back to the member.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's not really that complicated. It's a 7-page document. It's just that the important information for Nova Scotia taxpayers is left out. Mr. Speaker, the NDP government, this minister, seem to have taken spending habits from the previous Conservative government, spend now, ask questions later, hope for the best. Mr. Speaker, I would have gladly walked across the floor last week, as the minister suggested, except I don't think I would have received an answer with that approach either. If the province is using taxpayers' money to pay the legal fees and insurance for Northern Timber, then the minister should report that to this House. My question to the minister, how much will the legal and insurance fees cost Nova Scotians from your deal with Northern Timber?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my response remains the same. And, you know, again, that offer for any member of this House to come to me in a very, very civil manner and ask an appropriate question, myself, along with my staff, will work diligently to get that information. If the member wants to meet with me and with staff with respect to Northern Pulp, I would be more than happy to arrange that meeting, Mr. Speaker. We as a government have nothing to hide, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Deputy Premier. It's almost like in Nova Scotia there's a new game of Where's Waldo. This time it's Where's the Premier? Mr. Speaker, we've known whether it was up with the union bosses. He's publicly said he's not in the province. He's in Houston.
Just a reminder, you cannot refer to a member that is not
He's already provided public notice. He's not in the House. So we know the Premier is in Houston today, Mr. Speaker, for OTC, a very important conference, and even though there's important things as Minister responsible for military relations, with the 100th anniversary of the Navy taking place here in the capital, Mr. Speaker, and throughout Nova Scotia. But one of the things is that we have the Minister of Energy at a time when energy issues are so paramount in this province, when there's others matters, and the Minister, as you know, is a very accomplished and capable person. So, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians have a question to the Deputy Premier, and that is, why not build in Houston?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when they were in government, they sent a bill, and that was a disaster. We remember that. We remember that bill as an energy minister, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, it's, you know, when the Premier is out representing this province, from whether it's in Vietnam, whether it's in Houston, whether it's in Toronto, it's about bringing business back to this province, Mr. Speaker. And I think it's more than a bit disingenuous for the member to talk about him not being here on a day to honour military and particularly Navy, where he proudly served, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North on your first supplementary.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Nova Scotians would be very proud if the Premier would serve here at home in Nova Scotia once in a while. And in fact, average Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, themselves have gotten creative. And I'll note that one Nova Scotian has sent in, I will table for the House here, a caricature that says, DD, come home.
No props allowed in the House,
I just table that. Sorry, it's not a map. It's a document for tabling. But it just goes to show you, Mr. Speaker, that average Nova Scotians are picking up on the absenteeism and are wondering. But with regards to the issue of energy, and the now Deputy Premier has been at OTC, he's aware of it. So I say, the Premier with something at home, to the Deputy Premier, why aren't you there? Because you know what it's all about.
Yeah.
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I want to respond to the member by thanking him for having that confidence in me. But, Mr. Speaker, the Premier is the Premier. He leads this province, Mr. Speaker, and he's been, as I mentioned in my previous answer, he's been in Houston, he's been in Toronto, he's been in Vietnam. Mr. Speaker, he is bringing jobs back to this island. That's how he's serving this province. He's bringing jobs and good jobs to this province. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Premier's new theme song may be I've Been Everywhere Man is very cold comfort to people that don't have jobs and in communities in this province that have been abandoned by the socialist NDP. But I'd like to do my final supplement to the Minister of Energy, because the Minister knows, the Minister, now Minister of Fisheries, member for Shelburne, and I'll table this campaign literature. It says, as part of it, the moratorium on Georges Bank is maintained as a platform commitment of the NDP. Yet the Minister has not provided clarity. People are looking for the clarity. They will not do an independent, transparent panel. So what is it? Is it development or no development in Nova Scotia, or is it just air miles for all is the plan of the government?
Hey! The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for a couple of those questions. You know, I have a lot of things. I have a lot of things of consequence decided in our department as we're looking at the important decisions which are going to be forthcoming over the next number of days and weeks. And one of them that's kept me from doing the extensive traveling which you're suggesting is that we're looking very carefully at the important decision around Georges. And I can assure members opposite, and I have listened to members who've literally buttonholed me with their opinions. I've listened to people in the street. I continue to read the materials, and I want you to know this decision is an important decision for this government, for this province, and it'll be the right decision. It'll be made by this minister who's taking his time to stay here and do his homework.
Order. Order. The Honourable Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development. Mr. Speaker, the Deep Pernoo project is going to require a significant amount of input in the very near future. My question is, can the minister tell Nova Scotians what he has done to ensure that Nova Scotian involvement in this project?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development.
You know, thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's more of an energy type of question than it is for economic and rural development. The Minister of Energies would be more appropriate to respond to that question, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
To the Leader of the Opposition, that's why I guess I am here. I thank the member for the question. As I look at another one of these types of issues, I want to assure the member opposite that, again, it's one of those types of issues and one of those types of concerns that I must admit that when it comes to issues within my staff, that'll be something I'll have to get back to you on.
The Honourable Member for Preston on your first supplementary.
Well, to start with, I'm very disappointed in the minister's answer. Both ministers. Mr. Speaker, again, I'm going to ask the Minister of Economic Development. This is an economic development issue, a serious one. Mr. Speaker, what are you talking? We are talking a significant number of jobs here. These are highly paid jobs. This project is over $100 million, over $100 million. Nova Scotia stands to benefit substantially from this project. How many jobs are Nova Scotia going to get from this $100 million plus project?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, I reiterate, that's a file that hasn't come to my attention, to my desk, to my portfolio. That's a file that's been thoroughly vetted through the Department of Energy. And Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Energy made an offer to the honourable member, and I would make the same offer.
Okay. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Preston on your final supplementary.
Well, again, I'm very disappointed with the answer. I know the answer to the question, and neither minister can tell me what the answer is. This project, again, is over $100 million. $100 million in the Deep Pernoo project. And there's an offset that apparently this government doesn't have a clue about, of 1.1 million man-hours are supposed to be spent in Nova Scotia. 1.1 million. And the ministers don't even know anything about it. So I just wonder how they're possibly running this province. This is an important economic generator for Nova Scotia, and the ministers definitely do not know anything about it. This project has been on the radar for many people for a long time, and it should be discussed. The ministers have an important role to play in ensuring Nova Scotians get these jobs. How are you going to enforce the Nova Scotia requirement on this if you don't even know what the requirement is?
Your question is to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I can assure that member and all members of this House, when there are job opportunities and before waves hit between economic and rural development, whether it be the Department of Environment, whether it be the Department of Energy, whether it be Labour and Workforce Development, whether it be the Department of Education, Mr. Speaker, we work with companies. We work with companies, this whole cabinet and this whole caucus, work with those organizations and those companies that are bringing good jobs to the province of Nova Scotia so that we will be prepared. Unlike other governments in the past and long ago governments that when the wave hit just weren't ready. We will be ready.
The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is for the Minister of Health. In the throne speech delivered in this legislature on March 25th, it stated, caregivers play a vital role in helping their loved ones. In consultation with stakeholders, my government will change the existing caregiver allowance program to improve support and benefit for caregivers. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Alzheimer's Society, in a report released in early January, said that Canadians are developing dementia at such a rapid rate that dealing with the problem will cost a total of more than $870 billion over the next 30 years. The Society said that more than 103,700 people developed dementia in 2008 in Canada. Startling information, Mr. Speaker, so through you to the Minister, I would like to know how long will it be before this change mentioned in the throne speech will occur?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, caregivers are indeed a very important a group of people in our province, and they're very important to people in the Department of Health and to this government. And that's why we've met with groups like the Alzheimer's Society of Nova Scotia, Caregivers Nova Scotia, and other stakeholders with respect to the caregivers allowance, as well as the coming wave of dementia that is predicted in the report that the honourable member mentioned, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes, and your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again through you to the Minister of Health. Madam Minister, with the changes you are contemplating, can you assure Nova Scotians today there'll be a new and improved scoring system so that Nova Scotians, when they require care that can be provided by their loved ones, will get it and not become caught in a tangle of government bureaucracy?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I was saying, we're consulting with the various stakeholder groups. We're reviewing the program that was initiated in August. We're looking at various options to support caregivers in the province, and we will fulfill the election commitment that this government made to have an improved in-home support and other supports for caregivers, Mr. Speaker, in this year of our particular election commitment, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes, and your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister might have answered my final supplementary, but I'll ask it to get a fine timeline, if I can. Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary, again through you to the Minister of Health. In your campaign literature distributed last spring, your party said a government led by the NDP would implement self-managed care allowances and personal alert assistance programs in year one of our mandate. When can the constituents of Victoria the Lakes and everywhere across Nova Scotia expect to see your highly touted policy without pertinent restrictions?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to point out to the honourable member that the 4 commitments we made for the year that we just completed, eliminating security deposits, having an out-of-province travel program, appointing an ER advisor, and having ministerial accountability for ER closures, were all fulfilled, Mr. Speaker, within Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Fulfilled within the commitment made in the election, and Mr. Speaker, so will we fulfill the commitments that the honourable member referred to.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. There are several schools in the Strait Regional School Board currently under review for closure. Parents are worried and they have objections to the review process. Have you met with these parents about their concerns?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, my staff has been in regular contact with officials of that school board. I haven't personally been asked to meet with any of the parents. We are ensuring that the processes, the various components of the provincial review policy are being fully used by the school board, and these are very emotional and very serious decisions, and we encourage both the parents and the community and the school board to follow the procedures as laid out in that document. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove, and your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, I asked the Minister of Education and the Premier about their plans to support a school in Eastern Passage. During this exchange, the Premier contradicted the advice of board staff, who said that building the school may lead to the closure of others. He seems to think there isn't a conflict. So my question to the Minister of Education, why is your government considering building a school not on the priority list in HRM, while ignoring parental concerns about school closures in Guysborough and Antigonish?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My government recognizes that the policies and procedures around school reviews and capital construction have had a long period of being tried out, and the experience is such that we are committed to honouring those processes, and we will work within the agreed upon strategies and policies of the Department of Education and the government. So we are working within those processes. We will honour them. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove, and your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is also very interesting, considering that the finance minister, on a flight of fancy, said they would not be the government to close schools. This government intervened in the school board process and said it would be willing to meet with the board to discuss a school in Eastern Passage, despite staff recommendations that a school should not be built. Is the government going to intervene this time and prevent the closure of schools in the Strait region?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think everyone in this province recognizes the fiscal reality. Add to that the fact that we're losing approximately 3,000 students per year and the declining enrollment. And everyone realizes that the investment of public money into students and their programming and the teachers and support staff who are necessary to provide that programming have to be priorities. And I don't think any government would say that we're going to protect every building at the cost of not providing quality education to the students. Thank you.
The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is through you to the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage. Tourism operators across our province are feeling the effects of the Dexter NDP government's decisions. The loss of direct daily ferry service from the United States means that people on a 7-day vacation will now spend many more hours driving through other provinces, rather than coming directly to our province with their money. This means a change to coach tour itineraries and a loss of hotel nights. What is being done to compensate these tourism operators for these losses?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we continue to work with all tourism operators in the province of Nova Scotia for the benefit of tourism in Nova Scotia in general. And I think, I've got to say here, Mr. Speaker, we should be proud of the Department of Tourism, Culture and Heritage for the fine job that they've done. I mentioned here a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, about a $1.3 billion. And at a time of a global economic recession, for us to be able to hold that, I think is remarkable. So obviously there's some hard work being done, which will continue to be done as we try to hold the line. And more than that, we will try to increase the number of tourists coming to the province of Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Hants West, and your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Another policy hurting tourism operators in our province is the increase in the HST, giving our province the highest sales tax in the country. Because of the Canadian dollar is now on par with the American dollar, American tourists are not as plentiful. And those who do come are trying to figure out how to save money wherever they can. Has the department done any research into the effects the increase in the HST will have on tourism in our province?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, Mr. Speaker, there has been some research done with respect to the HST. And I'm of the opinion, Mr. Speaker, that if I'm planning a vacation, one of the factors that does not go into my certain equation, I think I speak for many tours, is not whether or not the HST is in play or not. When I plan a vacation, I know, and tourists know that they're going to spend money. That's one of the reasons they go on vacations, is to spend money in area X, get souvenirs, do some sightseeing. Mr. Speaker, the HST, in my opinion, is not going to play a significant role in deterring people from coming to the province of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Hants West on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, maybe I'm a little more frugal, but I know when I go on vacation, dollars do matter, and I want to get the most for what I can, and I do live within a budget. I think, and most do. I don't think that too many people go on a holiday and spend just freely and at will, and it doesn't matter what the final number is. Mr. Speaker, tourism operators like the owners of Malega Tours in East Uniacke, who have called their NDP MLA looking for answers, have been told there are no plans in place to help them with the most serious issue they're facing. Because they pre-book tours months in advance, they cannot now change the terms of their contracts and are forced to eat the 2% tax increase. This on top of already slim margins in the tourism industry. When the federal government removed the visitor rebate on the GST, a provision was included that all contracts signed before the budget would not have to be revised. Will the provincial government do the same for our struggling tourism operators?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in response, I would say that a 15% HST, it's not new to the province of Nova Scotia. We've had that before. Tourism still remains one of the best industries in the province of Nova Scotia compared to other industries. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal, because he's here. Mr. Speaker, today we learned that the province is charging over $1,000 in Freedom of Information fees to residents concerned about the St. Margaret's Bay Connector Road. The government made changes to cut the FOIPOP fees from $25 to $5 early in their mandate, something we support. I wouldn't clap, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I was on the opposite benches, I don't think I would clap too soon. Because what's the point if you're going to charge them $1,000 anyway? So, Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister is, why is your department charging so much money for the release of these documents?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member opposite for the question. I'm not aware of the details and why that particular $1,000 fee has been charged, but I will look into it, because I want you to know that the people deserve to know the information, particularly when it comes to that controversial issue. And the member from Chester St. Margaret's has been addressing the issue. The particular costs for that particular fee will be addressed with my staff when I have the opportunity tomorrow.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East and your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, you know, the Dexter government's looking more and more like the Harper government every day, with documents veiled in secrecy, decisions shrouded in mystery. You know, maybe that's where he's traveling to. You know, the press release from concerned residents points out that while in opposition, the member for Halifax Fairview chastised the government for having high FOIPOP fees. Mr. Speaker, this is just another example of the NDP saying one thing in opposition and now another in government. So, Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister is, have you spoken to the member for Halifax Fairview about his concerns about high fees charged to residents for FOIPOP applications?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite. I can tell you who I have been speaking to, and that's the people who live in Chester St. Margaret's. That's right. Who've been calling me, who've been meeting with me, and who've been looking for the plans. We've made information available to them as I can as the Minister of Transportation. I've discussed this issue, whether it's at hockey games or doorsteps. I know it's a controversial issue. It's an issue that of some importance to the people of Chester St. Margaret's. That's the information that we have to get out there. That's how we're going to make sure that we make the right decision when that connector road is planned and whether it goes ahead or not.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, while I appreciate the minister's comments, the issue of whether the road goes ahead or not is not the matter of the question today. The issue is if he truly believes and if the government truly believes that the public should have this information, then he should ensure that they do not have to pay $1,000 to get the documents so that they can have the same information that the minister has. So, Mr. Speaker, I would ask the minister whether he will review the situation immediately and not only review it, but ensure that these documents are released to the residents for the lowest possible fee or perhaps no fee at all.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite. I think recent events are even more controversial, perhaps not with the scale of the local issue in Chester St. Margaret's on that connector road. I hope the member, I know the member has been paying attention to the fact that when we were looking at the Convention Centre report, I had in my possession a number of reports that I believe should be made public to continue the debate.